The CEO role is a lot less about doing and more about setting vision and keeping people accountable.
What has AI done for your business now?
Writing textbooks becomes super cheap, and now with OpenAI it can be done rapidly. The most modern piece of the technology is AI-generated quizzes. There's a lot of cool stuff that we can help universities with.
All right, guys, welcome back to Built in America. We have Dave Sherwood. He's an Englishman who's changing the way education is done here in the US and in England. Dave, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks. Great to be here, Sam.
Dave, you are creating a monumental impact in education today on how textbooks are delivered to students. Why is that?
Yes, it's a problem I felt myself, right? I was born in Australia. I won a Rhodes Scholarship. I moved to the UK. And whilst I was studying there at college, I dropped out to tackle this problem. And, you know, anyone that's been to college or has family members there understands that textbooks are far too expensive. And, you know, it's still a very print-heavy space. So I was finding it difficult to even find digital versions. And where there were, the odd one that was just very, old-dated 90s technology. So what I wanted to do with BibliU and my co-founders, we wanted to address this issue. And initially we started B2C. That didn't really work as a business model. We had to pivot to B2B. And since then, as you say, we've got to 150 universities. And I feel like we're solving the problem I had with our customer base. And like those students, then they don't have to pay huge amounts for their textbooks out of pocket. And they have all this rich technology to help research. Actually, the most modern piece of the technology is AI-generated quizzes as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we can help universities with.
You know, when you look at the core problem, yes, maybe you're solving the financial need, but when I think about going and getting textbooks, and whether you're in high school or college, it's that long line that you're going to a store, and there's these books that are 50 to 60 pounds that give you scoliosis over time in a backpack, and you're solving a platitude of issues with BibliU now, right? And you have obviously identified that you're 34 years old now, you're a Forbes 30 for 30 guy, and you saw a really unique problem here. But where was that unique moat that you initially saw? What was the first thing that you wanted to solve for when building BibliU?
It's a really good question as well. I mean, I think when I started out, I was thinking more broadly about books in general, and then we sort of narrowed it down to university. I was obviously at university, so narrowed that down. And I assumed the problem was, students would like to subscribe a bit like Netflix or Spotify. And the two mistakes I made there was, one, the publishers hated that business model and we weren't getting any traction there. And two, a lot of students just, they don't want to pay. And a lot of them are very, very poor, even if they're from not a bad upbringing. Whilst you're a student, you're cash poor, you don't have any income. You might have your loans, you might have a little bit of money from parents, but you're pretty cash poor. So I think they were pretty wrong assumptions. And actually, in terms of like the niche and specific problem we figured out that we could address was like the students did really want textbooks, despite the fact they weren't really buying them as much anymore. And the universities also wanted to help the student, both in terms of making the course and study more affordable, but also providing materials that were required for learning. So it was really figuring out, well, actually, the university are the ones that want to pay for this and want to do this. And also by partnering with the university, we can actually start to try and address some of the teaching and learning challenges. So whether that's like having week by week quizzes that are built into the curriculum, you can't do that if you're doing B2C because you have no relationship with the professor or the faculty. So we found that there are a bunch of problems that the university were having on the back end that we could help solve as well, that we just had no idea about when we started out.
Tell me about your first customer that you did an MVP with and how you got to them, right? Because selling to schools themselves is a tough customer base, but once you get them, I think they have great LTV, they're going to be sticky, recurring. Walk us through that first journey of getting your first customer on board.
Yeah, great question. The first consumer customer initially, and then I'll talk a bit about the first university. We ran a free trial. We had a little bit of content on the publishers gave us. And at the end of the free trial, we basically put up a paywall and said, hey, do you want to subscribe for next year? And we had, I think, 4 or 5 people sign up. That was really promising. But the big problem was the content we happened to get was quite good. And we were like, oh, we can just get content for all courses. But in reality, we got lucky. And most courses and most publishers were just not interested in that B2C kind of Spotify model. So anyway, first university was a bit lucky. Like the B2C model wasn't working. We'd raised some investment and we're running out of money. And essentially, about when we were running out of money, a couple of the institutions came to us. I guess the students had talked to them. So I think Surrey was one of the first, or they didn't, no, Sussex, sorry, they didn't buy initially, but they invited us out to present. Bath, UCL, they were the first to go. Essentially, yeah, they just reached out, I think by email. Obviously, the students had told them about us and they'd said, look, we've heard good things, but it's not really fair that only some students are getting this. Is there a way we can pay a very discounted rate, but just get it for all of the students? And that's how we got the first customers on board, and it was chemistry at Bath and also at UCL. And obviously now we serve every discipline and all content, but that's where it started. And yeah, to your point, the sales cycle in education is really long, like 12 months is probably typical, but we got a bit lucky with the first customers. They were university libraries. It's kind of different to the US model, but the libraries have a budget they can spend all year round. So they're a bit less time constrained in that sense. And there's an existing budget. I know for companies that try to sort of create a new product line in education, it's borderline impossible because of budget constraints. And then also it was just hitting a need. Like the libraries had been looking for ways to buy digital textbooks for years. And there was just no way to do it. Like the publishers and the journal platforms had never figured out a business model that worked for the universities and the customers. So it was sort of addressing this problem that they wanted to solve. So that sped them up a bit in their decision-making buying process. So we got a bit lucky, to be honest, because if they'd taken 6 to 12 months, we probably would have been unable to raise more capital and gone bankrupt. So the timing worked just right.
Dave, I know you started mainly in the UK, and you started your venture of just dominating the sector in London and England, and then you eventually shifted over to the US. Talk to me about how you go about getting the first initial customers, as you already did, all through the UK, but then going into the US market and that having critical mass and creating escape velocity. How'd that transition to the US happen?
Yeah, great question. And I think a lot of businesses assume you enter a new country, you just like open up an office and start selling. And you can get lucky. Like I was speaking to an Australian guy the other day from Pathify, another edtech. And he was saying, yeah, for him going from Australia to the US, it was basically the same product and the same sales pitch. I don't want to understate what he's achieved. I think a great business, and it's hard crossing borders. But for us and a lot of companies, it's not the same product and the same sales pitch doesn't work. So obviously we tried it, but we quickly found out that so this is we probably had 20, 30 universities in the UK. So we weren't market leader or at most, there's about 100 universities in the UK at the time. But I just thought we need to get ahead of ourselves before this market runs out of space. And obviously we've taken venture capital, so they're expecting high growth for many years, not just the next few years. And so that's why I was so like, we need to get to the US, because you have 4,000, universities, colleges there. And yeah, we started the same pitch. Turns out libraries didn't really buy textbooks in the US and didn't really want to, because the bookstore sort of had stitched that whole space up, and they had an exclusive with the university. So the library was actually legally limited in what they're allowed to buy anyway. So that was a bit of a wake-up call. And then we started sort of copying one of the existing business models, which was just like partnering with some campus stores. Didn't really work. The existing players had a pretty good setup there. And then we came up, so we had to pivot twice basically. And then we came up with a new model. We're like, well, what if we essentially remove the campus store from the picture and just go directly to the president, CFO, and say, you don't need this anymore. Like, let's go fully digital. And that kicked things off. Interestingly, it turned out that a lot of them still do want the stores. So then we bought the retail division, and we do digital only, we do hybrid, and the hybrid could be e-commerce or it could be with an actual physical store. But that put us in a really unique position, and sales have gone well. But yeah, if I were to show you the UK product and sales deck, other than the student interface, you'd think that there were different companies and completely different products. So it's quite interesting how things can work out.
Yeah, it looks like you made a couple different pivots along the way in order to shift to and augment to a business model that can adapt to, what the U.S. market wants versus what the England market wants. And then through that process, you went and raised, a series of money. You think you did a Series B for about $15 million, and then you acquired Texas book companies along the process. Now, you told me earlier before the pod, you guys are scaling past $80 million of revenue now, which is a huge accomplishment. One thing I'm very curious about is like back in the UK, you had a large layoff at one point. And as a young founder yourself, you're 34 years old, you're a CEO in the seat, you can deal with imposter syndrome sometimes. And you had to go through this series of transitions to lay people off during a time where it was unpopular, of course, right? How did you navigate through that?
A really good question, Sam. It's a question that's not really asked enough. And it's very important to me personally. Obviously, those that were let go, it's a really negative, difficult time for them as well. And it's something that happens in the business world all the time. It's not really talked about or understood or reflected on enough. It's sort of like hidden to the side. Anyway, we've been quite lucky. I've been doing this 10 years, and it's the only layoffs we've had to do. And partly good strategy, making the right decisions and managing costs and revenue well, and partly luck with investment around the product market fit happening at the right time. We're profitable this year, which is super exciting. Profitable now, actually. So hopefully we're past those trickier, juggling investment, revenue, cost situations. Anyway, so essentially what had happened was we raised the Series B, COVID, raised a ton of money, quite ambitious with our plan. The UK had gone really well. We'd had a COVID burst there, got to 60 unis. There's 100 between us and others in the space, pretty much saturated the UK. Unfortunately, the UK had started to cut some COVID budgets and went back. And the CFO and myself hadn't realized until about 6 months in. And so that was on us. And so we should have known that earlier with better tracking, financial planning, etc. So what we do now is the COO every week actually reports on how the accounts are tracking versus what budget said they would track to. So we know in advance if there are any issues. And the other issue was we planned for US growth, and we had got product market fit at that point. Stuff wasn't working quick enough. Anyway, the combo of those, we're burning nearly $10 million a year, running out of money. We had to make the cuts. It was really tough. I remember it was quite an emotional day, obviously really hard for those that had been let go, many of whom were great employees, and just unlucky. And I have to take responsibility for putting them in that situation. And with different decisions, we could have avoided it. Different decisions, largely from myself. So yeah, definitely a bit of a dark day, to be honest, and a dark time. So I must say, it was a big learning experience, both in terms of okay, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And a big part of not happening again is has been breaking out of the VC excessiveness approach to business, which sort of everyone has to do now. But back in 22, we were one of the first cutting, if that made sense. And so we've been extremely careful about hiring. So we only add new hires. New hires, a proposal has to come to the executive team. I have to explain exactly why the new hire is required, obviously why technology tools can't do the job, etc. So our software division is actually still a bit smaller now than it was then, which is kind of crazy because revenue's 5 or 6 times higher. We obviously have a retail division now, so many more employees on that end of the business. And yeah, I guess just a time to reflect and try to make sure we made better decisions going forward. In the VC world, there's always so much investment sloshing around prior to the last couple of years, and this kind of mentality from the investor board executive level of just spend anything you want, and if some revenue grows, that's good, and it doesn't really matter about how much you lose. And I think that never made sense in any environment. People just getting carried away.
Yeah, this is the tough part about people who go raise VC today. And for the audience to understand, VC is all about escape velocity growth. for you, when you go and raise VC, there's an inflection point where you have to understand whether you want to go put money back into R&D or put money back into revenue growth, right? And the VC firms are heavily persuading you to, grow revenue nonstop in any way possible. And then that can affect profitability at the same time. How do you manage that expectation to understand whether you want to go build a product very well, or you want to still get that hockey stick revenue growth because you have a VC firm on you every single day, wanting you to go scale as fast as possible?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think a lot of founders raise money because actually it ties in perfectly with your last question, because they've hired too many people, and rather than right sizing a company to reflect the realistic growth rate and revenue and profitability, they think, well, I can avoid laying people off if I just raise tons more investment. And actually that just prolongs the problem and compounds it, because the new investor is going to want you to grow even faster. So I think the simple answer is only ever take VC money if you're 80, 90% confident that the money will make you grow faster. So for that to happen, you need to already have product market fit. The growth rate needs to be pretty good. And the limiting factor needs to be not enough marketing spend, not enough salespeople. I guess anyone to build revenue. So that's obviously product ops, etc. Or in some cases, you need capital to set up new customers. So maybe you do sign-on bonuses or you have to buy inventory and stuff like this. And most of the founders I knew would raise when product market fit was shoddy. We did it 3 or 4 times, and you shouldn't be raising them maybe small amounts to just kind of tick the small team over until you figure things out. But like to raise a few mil and hire 10 salespeople, you have no product market fit. It's not gonna fix anything, make things worse.
Yeah. And talking about where BibliU is today, you guys are having massive growth. I believe you're like at 60% growth now, and you're finally hitting profitability. What has changed drastically now than over the last few years?
Yeah, good question. Partly it's scale and product market fit. That are the main answers to the question. So we've had a good, like the last 5 years, we've averaged 60% CAGR, so 6% growth. 1 year was flat, and a couple other years are over 60. So broadly, it's been really good. And if we think back to, the year that was flat or before this 5-year window, difficult years were generally spending too much money that we'd raised and not having product market fit. So like just kind of spinning your tires kind of thing. And the right thing would have been to do is reduce the spend a lot and just really focus on the product market fit. And if you're not growing for 2-3 years, but you're not spending too much, or maybe you're just breaking even, then when things start to click is maybe when you look to raise money. But what's really clicked for us the last 5 years, firstly, the UK and COVID, we were positioned well. We already had 20, 30 schools before COVID. And so when COVID happened, they knew to call us up because they trusted us. They knew we worked with other universities. Whereas there are a couple of players that were working with 0 universities. When COVID hit, it didn't really help them very much. So it was partly COVID, partly like right place as well, being like setting up a good path. That lasted a couple of years. Then we went flat, like I said. And then the next critical piece was product market fit in the US and the acquisition in the US, which not only gave us a bunch of customers there, but also made product market fit better. And then since then, it's becoming quite easy to predict growth. Growth could always be better. I'm not saying growth is easy or we're growing as fast as I'd love to, but we know how many leads we generate each month. We track that. We know that it takes 6 months to close them. We know that on average, they're going to bring in around 200,000 in recurring revenue per university. And then you can just model. And so the last 2-3 years, it's been like quite easy to model where we're tracking. And then in terms of profitability answer, it's largely a scale thing. Like most software companies have a base load of engineers, salespeople, etc. they need to have. And therefore, for you to be a very profitable business, you need scale. And then once you scale, you don't have to increase those fixed costs as much. Although I wonder, and maybe you've seen this more, Sam, with AI now, I feel like you could have built this product we have with like 80% less cost than we put into building the products. And so maybe that, maybe you don't have to wait as long for profitability. You don't need tons of customers and a big fixed cost base. So yeah.
what has AI done for your business now? And then how do you navigate that through a competitive landscape? So I'm sure there's other companies out there who have tried to emulate what BibliU does. And, you have to face those adverse effects of that. Walk me through that journey.
Yeah, if we look at like those, obviously the AI tools we use internally, but if we look at the market, our marketplace, and how AI is impacting, the first is that writing textbooks becomes super cheap if OpenAI can just write a pretty good first draft. Maybe soon it'll be able to write a good final copy. But majority of the cost and time to write a textbook or piece of courseware is that kind of drafting process, which can take a couple of years. Have a team of multiple faculty and academics writing it, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. And now with OpenAI, it can be done rapidly. So that will mean that the open education resources space and the independent publishing space grow more quickly. So we've got a couple of interesting publishing partners that are doing their drafting with AI. A company called Knowledge Consortia, they'll do the first draft in AI and they'll bring in editors to fact check it and things like this. But they can produce a text for 5 or 10% of the cost of the historic numbers. So there'll be a huge shift there to a new wave of new content producers. But what's probably a bit more threatening, because we're content agnostic, we work with any content creator, and we have an exclusive arrangement with the school, so it all runs through us. What's a bit more threatening is OER, where a professor either adopts something off the internet that's free or writes it themselves. And we have, incentives for them to put that on platform, and we help them use AI to build quizzes and stuff like this and have analytics to see who's completing. But there's an increasing amount of professors that may just not use our platform and be off platform per se. So I think it's the AI or OER generated content that's the bigger risk to the space. And we have to just increasingly invest in tools so they can do that AI generation with partners of ours. So like I said, the Knowledge Consortia, there's some good content creators out there that will do it for them, and tools that will ensure that content is enriched. So not just like highlights and comments, but things like quizzes, analytics, and AI tutor, things on our side that incentivize them to put it onto the platform. So that's the main thing in our space at the moment. A lot of B2C usage is moving away from, like Chegg, for instance, they would have like a spell checking software or something like this, or an essay writing helper. But you just do that with OpenAI now. So you are seeing some usage leaking in from our sector directly to OpenAI. But because we're on the university side, obviously the university still needs to have providers and stuff like this. So we're not, on the B2C side directly.
Dave, as you've been in this journey for about a decade now, you've raised institutional capital. You're dealing with the complexity of how AI is also affecting your business potentially. If you had to point out one thing over the last decade that's been monumental for a challenge that you have to overcome, what would that be?
Oh, good question. What's happened in 10 years? You got COVID, you got AI, you've got the early days when bankruptcy was the most likely option, every other month. Change. I think, with time, for me personally, it's been getting better at managing and leading. And I think when you're small, a lot of leadership is doing and telling, and that's just how things work efficiently if you're 3. But when you're 250 like we are now, I really have to bring in awesome people that are better at me at those things, whether that's sales, whether that's lead gen, whether that's products, empowering them, trusting them, coaching them, helping them, challenging them, keeping them accountable. And there's a fine balance between, keeping them accountable and keeping these on track, or like disempowering them and micromanaging them. And I think I've tended towards the latter a lot in my early years. And I've been sort of, with some coaching, been working towards, more empowerment. So that's been a big change for me personally.
Tell me a little about the coaching that you do now. As a CEO, you're young, you're running a very large company that's almost about to scale to $100 million of revenue. Who are some of the coaches and advisors at a young age where you're competing against some of the best in class that have shaped you to who you are today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many like coaches and advisors out there. And I think a lot of them aren't going to help a young founder in a small company. The best coaches have been people that have done similar things before. So actually one of our early chief revenue officers, she'd been in higher ed for like 2 decades. And she taught me basically everything about sales. And that really helped also in like the product side, because if you don't understand the sell and the customer, you're not going to understand what to build or where to drive things. So she's great. She's actually a board member now. So I brought her in as the chief revenue officer. She did, I think, 4 or 5 years with us. Now she's a board member. Her name's Shannon. She's been awesome. And if anyone's interested, Shannon Meadows, they can reach out and I'm sure she'll have a chat to them. Then another coach mentor of mine, Misty, she unfortunately passed away recently, but she was the chief marketing officer of Instructure, who are like one of the big, unicorn, one of the most successful companies in higher ed tech. And then she was CEO of Caris as well. And she coached me a lot on how to be a CEO, how to scale, how to manage, larger organizations and revenue streams and products and things like this. She's awesome. She was personal coach for a while and then a board member. And then I've had a communication coach that was really helpful to help with like, sort of gestures, verbal and written communication. And I've had sort of more generic coaches as well. I find the generic coaches run out of steam pretty quick. They'll talk high level and give you some tips, but if they haven't been a CEO before, if you have specific problems, they often can't help very well. They were quite good actually in dealing with some team building and team challenges I'd had. But yeah, and so every year I do a Corn Ferry 360. The board, my team fill in, and I've just got a recent one. It'll rank me on like 30 different skill sets, like either like okay, good, or needs attention. And even if it's good, it might still be one of your lowest ranking things. So that gives a clear thing of like, this year I'm going to focus on communication and driving engagement, and then I can focus on those things.
The fact that you have coaches is admirable. I do the same thing. And I think a lot of founders that come to this podcast look at their advisors, their coaches, their board as their mentors. And as someone who has coaches, to guide them to become the best CEO, the question I'd pose to you now is, what makes a really good CEO? And then how do you communicate as a CEO as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you will have spoken and spent more time with CEOs than me. So I'm interested in your opinion. I can only really speak to myself, and I'm on the board of one smaller company and a charity. I think if I think about my board positions, the best CEOs there have been highly motivated, hungry, positive, optimistic, willing to take pretty radical problems and challenges and figure them out and turn them into positives. Like Bridget, the CEO of Teach Learn Grow, on the board there. Like in her first couple of weeks, there was COVID, and they do like volunteer tutoring, and she had to cancel a whole program. And I think it was midweek, and they had to bring everyone back. And I think as a CEO, like that could feel pretty catastrophic, or there's no way out of it. But she just managed it really well. And then I think as things change over time, the CEO role is a lot less about doing and more about setting vision and keeping people accountable and bringing great people in. And I think a lot of young CEOs like myself forget that, and it constrains the business. If you're too involved and you're doing too much and you're micromanaging, people hate it, but also things move slowly and bad decisions are made because you're not actually on the ground and you don't actually have the best data. You're not the best person to solve a lot of those problems. So that's what I say. I'm curious to hear what you think. I mean, you obviously met quite a few CEOs.
Yeah, fair. I'll look at it from my perspective, and some of the things that I've heard about is, if you look at the way Elon runs his companies, he basically sprints every single week. And at the end of the week, he's looking at the largest problems within each company, right? How to go solve that. There's a book also called Who Not How that changed my life. Not sure if you ever read that book, but it's a fantastic one. And rather than making a to-do list, it's almost about making a to-do list, right? And your to-do list is basically who's going to go fill those problems within your company. And if you look at the limelight of how your company is operated, you as a CEO should be hiring the best talent in class at all times to solve the biggest problems in the company. Because the second you have to go downstream and continue to solve other problems, you're exposing yourself to other issues, right? And I think that's where the CEO has to sit. I mean, you look at Nick Saban, who's one of the best coaches in college football over here, or Tom Brady, who's the quarterback. As a quarterback or the coach of the team, you are make sure you have full visibility of everything in front of you. So when you're throwing the ball, you're throwing it to your team members who can go solve those plays for you. And I just found that some of the best CEOs I've ever talked to know how to delegate so well, and then know how to communicate to go motivate and inspire other people around them to build culture. And I think where the best CEOs come into place is they know how to turn management into culture as well, right? You have a CEO, a VP of revenue, your CFO in place. You have to turn those guys into a team that is now a culture as well that understands your vision. They're the olive branch of who you actually are. And once you're able to implement that in your company, the company starts to form and run without you. And then you're just solely focusing on the biggest problems at that company level. I think that's where you finally have like the best motion and growth within a business. And you finally start to see, things move into the right rhythm. Some CEOs that, I admire how they run their companies. I would say I listen a lot to Scott Galloway. I don't know if you know who Scott is, but he's a great person that really emphasizes how companies should be run, how management should be done at different businesses. And it's a great philosophy because ultimately you are going to be the one that's going to be held at the helm of how problems are dealt with in the business. And if you are respected by your peers at all times on how decisions are made, you'll be put in the best viewpoint of the business. So that's how I view, being a solid CEO.
I love Scott Galloway too. Super interesting, both in like business tech leadership, but also just like a super well-read, smart guy. He comments on lots of different topics from like politics to like personal.
Yeah, so well versed.
Yeah.
Dave, what's one book that's changed your life now? As a man in textbooks who is changing the way education is done, what's a book that you can reflect on?
Well, it's hard. There are a lot of good books that we've used over the years. I think I'll go with two to cheat the question a little bit. But strategic selling is excellent for anyone like struggling with sales, product market fit, etc. Shannon basically taught me that, but there's a whole book around it, which is really good. A Miller Hyman book. And then Scaling Up, I'm sure you heard of by Harnish. That's how we run our strategy and track strategy and accountability. And it's very specific with some nice templates and stuff like this. I think those two have probably made the biggest difference. Although I might also throw in, to really expand this question, hiring success, which to your point, I think number one thing a CEO has to do, even when you're 3 people going to 4, number one job is getting great people. If you bring in people that aren't great or aren't a good fit, you're going to create so many problems. And it doesn't matter if you're getting everything else right, things will be very difficult. So actually getting the hiring right is critical as well.
Dave, how do you run meetings? A book I read was Traction, and it talks about how to run a proper meeting and how to make things efficient. Because I think in companies today, there's a lot of bullshit that goes on in these hour-and-a-half meetings that nothing, you walk out of it, you're like, wait, did everyone just express their ego and opinion and then nothing really happened? Or do we actually progress and move the ball forward, right? The way that I look at things is I'm very quick to say, I have this big pillar in front of us that's sitting on a doorstop, right? The next doorstop, let's say, is 3 inches above that. I'm just trying to move the pillar 3 inches forward. And as we're progressing through every single issue, how quickly we're getting that pillar to the next doorstop, right? How do you view running meetings today at your company, and how do you progress the ball forward?
Yeah, great question. The 2 key things are, 1, no presentations. If there's like interesting information that will help inform a decision, that's great, but it needs to be sent around as a pre-read at least a day before. And then if people need to clarify, they can ask some questions at the start. But no one standing there for 20 minutes reading words off a deck. I mean, I learned to read when I was 5. I don't need someone doing that for me. And that's what wastes most time in most meetings. And it's funny, it's almost like human nature. A lot of our meetings, people still try to do that at the start, and I have to remind them we're not doing this. It's a pre-read. We'll answer questions and move on. And the other one is from Bezos. I think they're both actually from Bezos from his biography. But there are two types of decisions, right? One-way doors and two-way doors. And a two-way door means you can quickly make the decision and then come back through the door if it's the wrong decision. And so the key is to not waste too much time overanalyzing, debating those things, deciding and moving on. So I like to have a vote with my team. I'm the last to vote, and I try to hold my opinion until the end, because as soon as I say what I want, people like subconsciously often agree a bit more with me than maybe their original opinion. I think Bezos also said that one. He talks a lot about meetings in his bio. And then the one-way door is like a huge decision, like we're going to invest $1 million in the US over the next quarter. And sort of once you've made that decision, you can't claw that investment back. And so you've got to be much more careful about those decisions. And if they take a week or two, like multiple exec meetings to discuss, then that's fine. But yeah, always having an agenda, action items that chased up outside of the meeting, so you're not reading them at the start of the meeting. And my chief of staff kind of keeps order and keeps things running, so I don't have to like follow up before and after meetings. Now that the key elements.
Dave, I want to transition a little bit to something a little more philosophical. As a young founder, you've been doing this for 10 years, like I said. There are certain parts of the journey where you have to really contemplate life and wonder, like, what path am I really on? Am I on this hedonic treadmill of just working all day and not understanding my purpose of life? And the big one I want to ask for you is that, what's something you believe now that you would have thought probably was insane 5 or 10 years ago when you started this?
Yeah, good question. And yeah, I mean, it's such a long time, 10 years, right? Like the number one thing is like, how do you kind of consistently stay motivated? But the one big kind of learning over that period, well, actually, yeah, maybe take a more personal philosophical view. I think founders like, I'm going to sell this business that's $200 million in 2 years from after I create it. And, that there's basically no chance that will happen. Obviously, you read about it happening occasionally, but like 99.99% of businesses, it's a 5-year run to create a decent, profitable business model and a 10-year run to make a very profitable, bigger business and sell it for a good amount of money. So you need to think of it like a 10-year marathon. I think in the early days, we'd work weekends. I'd get everyone in the office on Saturday, and we'd work late into the evening. We'd sleep very well. We'd eat very well. We'd travel too much, stuff like this. Yeah, that's fine if it's a 2-year project like that. If you're working in an investment bank for 2 years, it's going to be shitty, but you'll get through it. But if you're going to work in an investment bank for 10 years and never be promoted and have to work all night, every night for 10 years, you've got to burn out. And so I think the same approach to the business, it's like, got to look after your relationships. Like you mentioned, you have a partner, maybe personal friends, obviously, really family, super important. So you can manage that, make sure they're getting enough time, and personal health, physical health, mental health. So I do a bit of yoga. I do exercise every week. I travel. And then most importantly, it's just like trying to be quite strict about working hours. So for me, that's 10 to 7, Monday to Friday. And yeah, I mean, there are weekends I work and there are evenings I work, particularly if there's an investment about to close or an acquisition about to close. But off peak, it is totally doable to stick to fairly rigid hours if you're disciplined. And that way it is a marathon and it is sustainable for 10 years. It doesn't mean you love every year as much as the last, but it's a sustainable way to go about things.
Dave, when you start a company, you have a North Star, and that North Star sometimes when you're 23 years old can be a bit audacious, can be a little bit more monetarily driven. I'm sure that North Star has changed today. What is that North Star for you at the age of 34?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, because again, like, I was like, 3 to 5 years we'll sell this thing, sell for $1 billion. Yeah. No, totally. And our most recent valuation was 80 million. So 10 years in, right? Which is, I feel really proud about that, and we're very fortunate. But yeah, in terms of North Star, I really would like to take this through to 500 universities. We've got 150, and that will be around 5 million students. and up from the million or so that we use up over the next year. And that way we've had a really big impact in the UK, of course, and then also a really big impact in the US, and actually genuinely touched a significant percentage of the entire population of university students. And I feel then I've kind of achieved my goal, which was to help students with affordability and learning. And then from there, I think it's an open question. Do I want to double down and spend more time or not? I think over the long term, I don't see myself as CEO in 20 years. I'd quite like to spend some time in politics, which is a bit of an outlet for a tech founder, I know. But yeah, no, there's certainly the short to medium term. It's all about let's impact as much as we can. And all these difficult years of getting product market fit together and getting to profitability. Now let's really make the most of those and grow as much as we can. I obviously, each year we're growing more than the previous, and that's kind of crazy. This year we'll grow as much as it took us 5 or 6 years to get to in the first place, if that makes sense. Just the years growth. So it feels like things are heading in a good direction.
Yeah, it's crazy how that growth happens once you start knowing what you're doing, right? The first 4 years is let's just fuck up as much as possible, and then now we'll know how to go grow. Dave, you've been a wealth of knowledge. Appreciate you coming on the pod. Where can people find out more about you and about BibliU?
And I've really enjoyed it, Sam. I think you asked extremely detailed and personal questions, which is great. So thank you for having me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Dave Sherwood, and our website is www.bibliu.com. If you work in higher ed and would like us to help you on campus, to reach out.
Let's get some textbooks, baby. Let's go. All right, Dave, that's the pod.